On this episode of Insight, have we reached the end of debate? Lila, you're 15, you're part of your school's debating team. I'm going to throw it right out there. Tell us, what is a tradwife?
So a tradwife is short for a traditional wife, and it's a movement that fosters women to do traditional roles. So it stems from 1950s kind of ideologies. So often women are staying home doing housekeeping while the men go out and make the primary income.
You were asked to argue that the tradwife movement was good for women. How did you feel about that?
I was very against it initially, but then when I go in and do research and kind of look at statistics, I was kind of like swaying between sides and kind of found middle ground between both of them.
In debating, do you get to choose a side?
No, so you're given a side in debating.
You're here with your teammates Ilse, Nevada and Amelia. Welcome to you all. Ilse, how did you feel when you learned you had to argue in favour of tradwives?
I didn't really understand the topic because it was quite different from what I'd initially heard. The topic was framed a bit differently, so it was that the tradwife movement was good for women, so we were primarily arguing about women's well-being and stuff, so it was a bit different from like just saying women have to stay home and they have to take on that role of looking after the house and the children.
I'll put it out to all of the team. Was anyone excited about the topic?
I wouldn't really say I was excited, but I was more like inspired to do lots of research and find out different points of view from the topic.
Sonia, you're the chairperson for Debating South Australia. You set the topics and you also adjudicate.
Yes.
Why did you choose tradwives?
I'm on the internet all the time. I'm trawling looking for topics that I think are suitable, a little bit different or they're current. And I've been seeing this tradwife, people have written about it and stuff like that. So then I thought, yes, that could be a very interesting topic, something a little bit different. But the whole idea of a debate is that it's an intellectual exercise and it's good to be able to look at the affirmative and a negative case. So then some of the students, although they didn't say anything, I could tell from the later debates that I saw that they didn't have their heart in it.
Did you get any feedback from parents about debating that issue?
One of the emails that I received from a school had mentioned that some of the parents weren't too happy. After the debate with these girls, I saw a couple of parents who had said they had reservations about the topic. But generally in the debating community, everyone accepts the fact there are topics that you may not like. Sometimes schools don't like the topic. Not the topic, they don't like the side they're on.
Girls, how did your families react to you debating that issue?
Dad was quite surprised about the choice of topic because of the South Australia social media ban. I don't think many people knew like what a tradwife was, like younger people. So my mum, she thought that the topic was quite relevant, which really surprised me because I had no idea what a tradwife was. I had to ask my mum, I had to ask Lila. We had to talk about it and define it.
Ilse?
My family didn't have much to say about it. Like, they always have their opinions on things, and their main stance on it was that while they disagreed with what we were arguing, they were interested in hearing like the complete opposite side of what they believed.
Even the media caught on to your debate. Sonia, did you expect such a response?
No, I didn't. I was really quite shocked. In fact, a friend of mine who was in London at the time rang me and said, "Goodness, you're in The Guardian in London." It started off with someone posting on a Facebook page and it kind of took traction after that, which I didn't take too much notice of. But when we started getting the newspaper and radio stations asking us about it, I must admit I was really surprised because these were people who are outside of our debating community but seem to have an interest in the topic.
What do you think people tend to get offended by?
I think part of it could have been a feminist lens looking at what women should or shouldn't do. And then there is no discussion for an opposing argument. It's that as though it's settled and that we can't discuss it any further. That's the only thing I could think of.
Lila, you and your team had to argue for a side you didn't necessarily feel aligned with at first. What did you learn from that experience?
I think arguing a side you don't agree with, it helps you develop your critical thinking skills. It also opens up your mind because you're able to understand a side better, which kind of develops your sympathy as well. And I also think it allows you to analyse sources and kind of look over research.
Boso is a 2-time world debating champion. We visited him in Washington, DC.
My name is Boso. I am a 2-time world champion debater, and I'm currently an attorney here at one of the great law firms in Washington, DC. I moved from South Korea to Australia when I was 8. The hardest part of crossing language lines was adjusting to real-life conversation, and the hardest conversations to adjust to were disagreements. I was a very shy kid on the playground, smiling and nodding, but keeping a distance from the other kids. I discovered debating in year 5, and to someone who had been used to being interrupted, the promise of being heard sounded like a kind of life raft. Debating changed my life because it gave me a voice. It gave me a set of tools to try the difficult task of changing someone's mind. So I went from being a shy kid, afraid above anything else of disagreement, to representing Australia on the global stage, a dream that I've had for a long time. Disagreeing is always going to be a leap of faith. It's one that I took. And what I can say is that people will surprise you. That by raising our voice in disagreement, fighting through the discomfort to do that, that we'll be rewarded with a richer relationship with ourselves, with others, and with the world around us.
Can you relate to anything Bo said?
Yeah, I think because debating has helped me to have a safe environment for debating. A lot of the times when I'm debating issues with my brother at the dinner table, he's interrupting me constantly and saying points that aren't even true. But debating is very evidence-based and it allows you to talk for 5 minutes without anyone else interrupting you.
Where did you guys end up standing on the topic of tradwives after the debate?
I believe that women should be able to do whatever they want to do, whether they want to be a tradwife or whether they want to work a 9 to 5, it's really up to them. And I think as a society, we shouldn't be telling them what they should be doing.
Karen, you're a mother of 2 adult children. Is there anyone in your life you disagree with?
Yes, well, there's several, but the topic tonight, my husband, we agree on many, many things, but the current political situations in the US have come to we can't talk about it point.
Really?
He's one way and I'm the other.
Right, so how specifically does that unfold?
He watches a lot of Fox and he obviously reads the paper and gets the other news from locally as well. I do some of that, although I can't watch Fox. I can't even be in the room. And sometimes when a topic comes up, I'll just say, that's just not true. That's just not true. and then we can't go any further because he doesn't want to argue about it. We have had, shall we say, things that had escalated from debate to argument, but we have to kind of just leave it alone sometimes.
Jack, you're Karen's son. Where do you sit?
Well, Dad is, I guess, the right-leaning family member. We've got a family group chat on Instagram where specifically Mum and I are most often sending notes we find, updates on events, just whatever we can, I guess. Partially we're informing each other, partially we're hoping he'll have a look at it and maybe have his mind changed a little bit.
Does he engage in those group chats?
Somewhat, yeah. He definitely reads it occasionally. He may not say that he's read it, but it pops up and he'll occasionally send something back too, although it's never the same amount.
So is it kind of 2 against 1? Like, how does this unfold, say, at the dinner table?
No, I wouldn't say it's 2 against 1. My sister Jamie, she's agrees with Mum and I for the most part, but she acts as kind of a peacekeeper, intermediary. She doesn't really like to see things escalate. But I wouldn't say that it's 2 against 1 or that we're really against each other at all. I think for the most part, our views do align. It's just, I guess, how we go about who we believe in, what evidence we believe in, and what we're convinced of, and the reality around us.
So, Karen, some topics, it sounds like, are sort of off limits.
Mm-hmm.
What if you and your husband are sitting at a table together with a group of people and, say, American politics comes up?
Mm-hmm.
How do you feel in that situation?
I rise to the occasion. I'd love to be able to have the banter and the conversation. He'll be sitting there going, oh God, here she goes again. But I love to be able to have that conversation with people, and I'm happy for other people to have an alternate opinion, but I think both parties need to be heard and given the opportunity to give the evidence of whatever it is you're arguing.
Jack, you work in politics. Are we losing the ability to have uncomfortable conversations?
Yes, is the short answer. In my view, debate, certainly in this country, is either febrile or deceased. And I think the greatest indicator of that is understanding what free speech is. Within free speech, there are two elements, and without those two elements, you cannot say we have it. First is, of course, the right to speak, but second is the right, or what I would say, the obligation to listen. And if one looks across the broad spectrum of debate in this country, many people are fulfilling their right to speak, but I don't know that we are fulfilling our obligation to listen. And without that element, then I think we're in a very difficult place. And this extends, of course, to politics. Politics is, of course, about winning at the end of the day, but one would hope that you're winning on the basis of a better policy outcome for the majority of people. And I think, unfortunately, we exist in a political environment where it's all about the politics. It's not about the policy. And so if our politicians and people in public life aren't playing with ideas gracefully, aren't appreciating the fundamental principles of free speech, then we're in a dangerous place.
You caught some backlash for an article you wrote last year. How were you labelled?
It had a very sensationalist headline, but...
That's it there.
There it is. Many people who sought to label me obviously only read the headline. What I was arguing fundamentally is this term, the rainbow community, is chief among them. But we have to break from this idea that certain gatekeepers have total possession over a monolithic idea of a group of people. Yes, I'm gay, there are other gay people who exist in the society, but that does not mean that our sufferance and our personal identity, something which we can't change, is ballast for the momentary political cause of a particular group. And so in essence, what I think is a more progressive point of view is that, yes, we come together in struggle, but we allow people to be liberated from the ideas such as their sexuality, their political ideologies, whatever it may be, which are personal to them. Because when we fail to do that, which we certainly fail to do in this country, I am prejudiced. So when I enter into a conversation with someone and they find out I'm gay, or they may know ahead of time, they will assume a set of values and beliefs that I may not have. And this is no way to ensure equality. The greatest way to ensure equality is to have people embedded in the society and connected to the people next to them.
You mentioned at the top of the essay that it took time and courage to express those views. Why?
I had to deal with two fundamental concerns. When you lose both your parents before the age of 18, you have complex relationships with abandonment and belonging. And what I was fundamentally doing in writing this article was vitiating any connection I had to this group, even though I don't believe the group exists. So I had to contend with that fundamental sense of belonging. But also, I had to deal with the reality that if you're interested in public life, it doesn't matter what you say, how eloquently you say it, how thoughtfully you might say it. The political machinery attacks you on the basis that you have said it. And that weighed on me very heavily. But I believed I was tacking towards the truth, and on that basis I thought it needed to be said.
Free speech has been in the news quite a bit recently. How do you feel about legislating freedom of speech?
I'm not a free speech absolutist. I think we do need guardrails. The incitement to violence is certainly one. Of course, the creation of free speech was with an intention that we would have a non-violent means of settling dispute. But when one moves to curtail free speech to such a point, or moves to curtail speech to the point of banning phrases and so on, such that we are not armed with the very thing that we use as a non-violent means of settling disputes, then I think we get ourselves into a very dangerous place, and we cut off the capacity to convince our opposite number, to identify the problems in society, and to have honest and authentic conversations about how we move forward collectively.
Peter, you're a senior lecturer in philosophy and you specialise in collaborative decision-making. Where is the line between free speech and hate?
I'll take the easy one, sure. If we wanted to go back to some of those fundamental texts, like John Stuart Mill, He used a rather nice example of the corn dealer, and you might believe that the corn dealers are responsible for inflating the price of corn and, you know, creating a lot of hungry people in the process. And Mill would say that you have a perfect right to say that that's what you think is the case. You could say it in the backyard barbecue today. You could write it on your blog. You could put it in the newspapers that was your view. But he did make the distinction about talking to an excitable mob outside the home of the corn dealer. And he said, in that context, you may say exactly the same thing, but something else might happen here. And it's that notion of your right to say what you wish, to indeed act as you wish, has to have a boundary when you're actually endangering other people. So to the extent that we understand this modern concept of hate speech, or framing it that way, is kind of associated with the inciting to violence and the possibility of doing harm to others. And that's a way of contextualising the words that you say, rather than just saying those words can't be said.
Nicole, you're an academic. In 2019, you were due to give a speech at the University of Melbourne. Your speech was about challenging the perception that being transgender is a mental illness. What happened on that day?
Even a couple of days prior, I started getting messages from a couple of my friends saying, "Oh, Nicole, a lot of people are reacting, very strongly to the talk for which you've written an abstract, and they seem to be organising a protest." So when I arrived, I'd been reading some of these tweets and some of the stuff that had been posted on Facebook, and I was quite shocked at some of the things that people were saying about me.
What were some of the things?
One of the first things that people said is, "Oh, this is a clueless cis TERF. How dare she come to our university and spread yet more trans hate."
What do you mean by TERF?
Okay, so TERF stands for Trans Exclusionary Radical Feminists. So these are the feminists who view themselves as, you can only be a feminist if you were born female, and so somebody who transitions and becomes a woman, they view them as, no, not even a woman, and so stay out of our spaces, not allowed to enter various spaces because that's, you're just a man entering spaces, so that's a TERF.
Was this a student group?
It was a student union group, I believe. As I understand it, somebody at Monash University noticed the announcement for my talk, and they decided to do a posting on Twitter saying they should think really seriously about who they invite into our community. And this then caught the attention of various people, some in America, others in Australia. And very quickly, what they did is, on the basis of something that was effectively a 100 or 150 word abstract, they made up a whole narrative about what I was going to say. And this narrative had nothing to do with what I was going to say.
Did any of the protesters try to engage and discuss your views?
Short answer is no, but there's a bit of a story. So I arrive at the university and meet one of the people that had invited me. Out of the corner of one of the windows, I noticed there's all these people. I thought, okay, they appear to be there protesting against me. I'll go out and say hello and try and tell them what the talk is actually about. So I went out there, shaking as anything. But the really surprising part was that, when I explained what my talk was actually about, I said, look, and then I said, so please, would you join us? Because I would love to have your input into this discussion afterwards. They said, no, we can't possibly come and listen to your talk. And I said, well, why not? They said, well, because we organised the protest.
Oh, so they kind of understood what you were going to be talking about, but they couldn't switch.
They couldn't switch.
You work in academia. Are universities a robust forum for airing differences of opinion?
You would think so. I certainly think of universities as the places where debate should happen, but you cannot say certain things. If I were to say that it is okay to be white, right, in this context, there would be a whole bunch of assumptions about what else I might be saying, even though I may simply be saying that it is actually okay to be white, just like it is okay to be brown, just like it is okay to be black, and so on and so forth. But people do tend to make assumptions that if you say certain things like that, like what I just mentioned, that you will have an abhorrent set of views, and on account of having those abhorrent set of views, you need to be, punished in some way and excommunicated.
Liz, you're a former educator. Where do you stand on free speech?
I think it's very important. I taught even very young children, 5-year-olds, some of the skills of philosophical discussion. So skills around formulating your opinion and justifying it, some of the rules about listening as well as being able to speak, some of the responsibilities that you have when you're speaking, and the fact that you respect the other people in the room, even if they've got different views.
Are there any topics that you won't discuss?
But one in particular, and it's very, very current at the moment, and I'm finding that I am discussing it in safe spaces, is gun laws. It's been a very sensitive topic in our family. We had a double murder in the family. So an extended family member of mine perpetrated killing his parents. He was an unlicensed gun holder, which we were not aware of. He had 7 guns, all unregistered. And we were also not aware of the extent of his mental health illness. So he had been having some mental health treatment, but clearly his treating teams were not aware of the seriousness of it either.
You were a member of the Queensland Greens. You're no longer registered with that party. Why not?
Over the years, I felt that there were often groups that became so dominant. It came to a crisis last year over a gender issue where one of the founders of the Greens had his membership revoked. And it was because he'd opened up a discussion on his Facebook page regarding gender issues. So he hadn't actually engaged in that discussion. But as a result of him not taking down that discussion, he had his membership cancelled. That's since had to be reversed, but it's left quite a lot of bad taste. And certainly for me, I was not concerned. The gender issue was new to me. I hadn't really thought about it. So it was something very new. But I found that when I did try to learn, I was being called a TERF, I was being called transphobic, I was regularly called a boomer, and I was told to go and join the Liberal Party. Not by the hierarchy of the Greens, but more by some of the grassroots membership. And it wasn't necessarily controlled very well. In the end, I felt that the safest place for me was, I enjoy getting involved in community work and getting involved in some activism, but I thought there's many other ways to do it and safer places to do it.
Clinton, you work in Indigenous mental health. Should everything be up for debate?
I think there is a place to put everything up for debate, but the debate needs to be undertaken in a way that remains mindful of the social and emotional well-being impacts that discourse can have. And I think that's something that we forget at times. We forget the power of our words and the impact and the influences that those words can actually have on different groups of people who are the topics of debates.
Can you give an example?
Look, I think the referendum was a prime example. The referendum quickly lost being about the debate of the topic and the context.
This is the Voice referendum?
Yeah. It quickly lost sight of being about the topic and the context and very much became about winning and egos. And in that, lost sight of humanity. So there was a lot of discussion that was occurring that wasn't in any shape or form considering the social emotional wellbeing toll, the mental load that was being put on all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. So that's why at the Black Dog Institute we were so focused on, during that period, promoting having a respectful referendum debate rather than promoting one side or the other.
Did you see those impacts in your own life?
Yeah, I've definitely seen those impacts in my own life, and not just in my life, but in that of my children as well. So since that period of time, there has definitely been people that I grew up with, that I was friends with, that I choose not to spend time with anymore because during that time, their positions and their inability to listen to and engage with a different point of view became very apparent. And I think as Aboriginal peoples, what's happened over a long period of time and continues to happen on a daily basis, I would argue, is we are constantly put in positions where we feel we have to not only voice but then defend who we are as a position. We need to look at how do we undertake debates in a more respectful manner that doesn't outwardly go to hurt people.
We're hearing the phrase cultural safety a lot these days. What does that mean?
Cultural safety is a right. It's a right for everybody to experience. It's no different to, I guess, notions of physical safety, psychological safety. And so as individuals and organisations, we have a responsibility to consider that diversity that's present in terms of how we choose to act, what we choose to do, in the hope that we can help create situations that others will experience cultural safety in.
Jack, you have First Nations ancestry. Did you feel culturally unsafe during that time?
No, I didn't. Of course, I'm stuck between two worlds in the sense that I appear as I do before you, but 25% of my heritage is Indigenous. So it is part of who I am. The original conception of cultural safety in Maori nursing, I think, was an honest one, but I have a real problem with it as a concept being applied to all spaces, because you immediately set up competition. You immediately set up a space where one group is elevated in their rights and privileges above the other. And in a sense, you're trying to create a system so perfect that people aren't required to be good. And the final point I will make is what I think the referendum revealed is that as a society, and certainly at a governmental level, we have so deeply inculcated the idea of disadvantage and disease into the Indigenous identity of this country that we've diminished the capacity to rise above those things and put out of our minds any caricatured arguments. So I think, there was a lot of lessons out of it, but one should not be that we retreat, rather that we advance, but we advance in a way more honestly and acknowledge that some of the current methods we are using are not correct and aren't convincing the majority of the society.
Have you ever felt harmed by a discussion?
Never. I have engaged in some pretty heated discussions about personal parts of my nature with people. And one great example is during COVID. A very dear friend of mine was totally off on a conspiracy tangent. I made a conscious decision, as painful as it was, to remain engaged, and we got through that. I learned some things about him, he learned some things about me. And as a result, our relationship is so much deeper. But had I not stayed and had I excised him from my life, I'd be poorer, he'd be poorer. And the opportunity to have not a debate but a discussion and find a way towards the truth would have been lost.
Nicole, you're a philosopher. What about you? Have you ever felt sort of harmed by a discussion?
Yeah, look, it's interesting hearing what you were just saying before, because I have. Part of the reason why I went to the University of Melbourne is that I'd noticed that there were a whole range of discussions on the trans topics which were being done in a very single sort of monotone voice. Only certain things could be said. And for me, as a trans woman, it was actually really important to be able to say, look, I don't particularly feel that a lot of the ways that so many trans lobby groups, how they portray what being trans means, which things are important, which things can be said and can't be said. For me, it was very important to be able to actually say, look, may I please enter my own voice here? What actually happened was that because I think it was a queer collective that organised this protest against me, because they decided that they already knew that I was a cisgendered TERF, they simply robbed me of my voice to speak, and there was nothing that I could say to them. So was it harmful? It was harmful to find myself surrounded at a university, a place where you're meant to be able to talk, have really open conversations, and indeed to be invited to give a talk on an important topic, which affects me privately. And then to have the very people who are apparently my people come out and shut me down so severely that I still, find myself shaking inside at the moment with upset.
Hannah, have there been any debates that you've felt were harmful?
Yes, I think plenty of the debates that we're having online and in person are harmful. The referendum brought up so many conversations and comments. I think the trans discussion has the same aspect. The marriage plebiscite had the same experience. I think anytime we talk about a population that people maybe aren't engaging with in their own personal life and people are given platforms to discuss it without having any connection to that community has potential to be hugely harmful to the human beings that are behind the debate.
I'm fascinated by this because all Australians were asked to vote in the Voice referendum and the marriage equality plebiscite. So how can people without that lived experience come to an informed decision on a vote that they must participate in?
I think the way that people are informed is actually by doing the research. And if the hardest part of your life as a privileged person in this country is to actually read and learn and listen, I don't think that's a big ask of people. During the Voice, there was a great debate online, which was all First Nations people coming at it from many different angles and having conscious debate, but coming at it from an educated point of view and a community that are actively involved in the outcome. Equally, with the change the date, abolish the date discussion, there's equally been a conversation of multiple First Nations people who all have differing views. And watching that play out as an ally and as a non-Indigenous person, that's a great way to learn and listen to the community rather than making an ill-informed view based on what you might see online.
Jack, what if we only heard from people with lived experience?
I think if we proceed on the logic that you must have a ticket to gain entry to discussion and that must be lived experience, then we assume that that person's perception of that experience is accurate and is attributable to all. I think this is a very dangerous road. We lose when we exclude people from discussion, and is the same principle as excluding people from the right to vote. We wouldn't tolerate that. But when you exclude people from the discussion, you cut yourself off from the opportunity to convince them. So I don't think the idea of having guardrails, barriers, whatever you want, gates to people entering the discussion is a good idea for any of us.
Do people make assumptions about your identity, for example, based on your appearance?
I have an Arabic surname, I have Indigenous heritage. People make assumptions about me all the time. I now am in a privileged position, but I grew up in very serious poverty. I grew up with very considerable violence. I lost both my parents before I was 18. All of these things are part of my identity and they inform how I face the world today. But I don't think that it would be for others to go and prejudge. So if someone sees me walking down the street, the nice Scottish fellow, Irish fellow, they probably assume, they've cut off so much of my identity. We take one element and we assume the rest of the individual, when in fact there is a complicated person sitting behind any one of those elements. And we've got to take the time to understand it and learn about it and thus build a connection from which we can grow.
Nicole, did anyone involved in those protests change their views when they knew that you were trans?
Almost nobody did. So what was interesting is that there was only one younger gentleman, I would have said about mid-20s, who approached me later on and he said, "Look, Nicole, I'm so very sorry about the fact that I joined this protest. I took it on face value that the way that your talk was portrayed was indeed that it was transphobic." So he was one person that definitely did change his mind. Strange part was that nobody other than him gave any indication of the fact that they did change their views.
In your experience, is identity a factor in debate?
I think that if you're speaking from a position of lived experience, there's probably going to be something useful that you might be able to say. But this gets really, really murky very quickly. Like I used to think, I'm not going to say anything about on the trans topic, partly because I enjoyed flying beneath the radar and people not knowing that I'm trans, but also partly because I genuinely thought that I didn't have anything novel to add. That it's just little old me, what would I know? But what I then noticed is that in the absence of me being prepared to go and say what I think and what my experience is, that other people were quite prepared to step in and say what it is to be trans, how people should, treat you, which things are and aren't important. And those things, precisely because I was so intent on not pushing my own views, well, that's okay. Other people stepped in and spoke for me. So one of the problems there is that identity can play a really important role as long as people have a certain amount of, being humble and being prepared to say, I am just talking about my position. But this, unfortunately, is very often not the case, and people quite often are prepared to start speaking on everybody's part. So identity is important because if you marry it up with being humble, then it's possible to hear a few novel things every now and again.
Are you always welcome speaking on women's issues?
I've been invited on a number of occasions to speak, and I've actually said no on all occasions. There was one occasion where my partner had been invited to an intelligence squared talk, but she was unfortunately recovering from cancer. But that was the only occasion where the talk was on a feminist topic and where I was prepared to step in because she simply couldn't, because she was lying in hospital, right? But I figure there are so many women, and I do not need to be one of them that transplains what being a woman is, right? Or what the important issues are. So I think there's a certain, lack of humble pie. And that's after, 35 years since transitioning. So when I see people being prepared to wake up one day, say they're trans, and then to start talking on women's behalf, I think, whoa, check yourself.
Clarity, you're an author and TikTok content creator. One of your posts caused quite a bit of controversy. What happened?
I'd made a post that was about my own lived experience with police brutality from back when I was a teenager. And somebody decided to comment on that post saying that I should not be speaking about this topic because I'm not Indigenous, because I can't relate to what Indigenous people suffer with police brutality.
How did you feel about that?
It's upsetting when people react to things like that when it's not what I'm getting at with the point of my post.
This was your response to those responses?
How come racism doesn't go both ways? How is it that somebody is able to jump in the comment section on one of my posts where I'm explicitly talking about my own first-hand lived experience with police brutality, and their comment suggests that I should not be speaking on a topic I know nothing about for the simple fact that I'm not Indigenous?
How did that go down?
It actually went pretty well. There was some people jumping into the other person's defence, but I even had a lot of Indigenous people jumping in the comments just saying this person does not speak on our behalf. Like, we're 100% aligned with you in this point of view.
Do you think you can have a constructive debate on social media?
Not normally.
Do you ever turn comments off?
I don't know. I feel that everyone is entitled to have an opinion. It is on my page, so I do obviously get the major word in it all. It's my videos that I post. But I don't like to shut people out from having their opinions.
Sergio, you're an artist. You share your views publicly. Here's you on Insight in 2014 talking about free speech.
You expressed yourself quite vociferously. You've got a truck. Do you understand that's offensive to some people?
They can be as offended as they like, but they don't have the right to cross the line and threaten me, injure me, my family, or my friends. And that's the difference. It's like, I really believe in who we are as Australians. And part of that is the conversation that we can and should be able to have any conversation, no matter how distasteful it is, to get to the other end of it.
Have any of your views changed since then?
No.
Do you enjoy disagreement?
I enjoy a conversation, and I enjoy the putting together of opposite ideas if there's someone there that has the opposite idea and they want to discuss it without just shutting it down by the stereotype, you're a racist, you're white, you're this and that. And that's where I think we have lost that ability for communication.
I want to show some photos of you. This is after an altercation on differing views. What happened?
They didn't like what I had on the car. And luckily they didn't break the quarter panel of the car, because that was really hard to replace, and they only hit me. But this is the outcome back in 2010, 11, when they don't like what you have an opinion of.
Why do you think your views attracted such a violent response?
Because I don't think there are any mechanisms to stop the negativity, because our legal system hadn't caught up with internet verbal violence at that point. I mean, all the death threats that I got at the beginning slipped through the net because the system hadn't caught up to make them illegal. Even with everything that we've been experiencing the last 2 years with protests in the street, it's taken a while now to see that consequences occur by allowing certain things to continue without robust debate back.
Do you ever feel like you might go too far?
No, because I never went to the point of saying blah, 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 and that has to happen to them. Because I never even said ban the burqa. I said say no to the burqa to open up a debate about why are people so touchy about it.
Karen, you and your husband have opposing political views. Have you figured out how to disagree well?
No, not really. No, we agree on many things, probably
Yes.
most things, but because it's about American politics and it's become more and more and more volatile since the current president was sworn in, it's got to the point now where we just know that unless I happen to walk through and throw in that's just not true. It's easier to just not go there. Just don't go there.
In terms of both of you, you and your son Jack living in the same house, does your dad sort of respect your view over your mum more, or...?
I wouldn't say he respects me more. I think it's just a different conversation when he's talking to his kid compared to his wife. I think he's more receptive to what I have to say because it doesn't come across as judgmental, but more, I guess, he's open to learning from me. But I wouldn't say it's a respect thing, no. He respects mum heaps.
How does he feel about both of you coming on the show?
I think he's a little nervous. But I did say to him that, no, we're not here to talk about him or even just us. We're here to talk about the ability to have a conversation, and it's been fascinating listening to everybody's opinions.
For those of us inspired to disagree well, here's Bo So with his top tips.
So here are my top 4 tips for disagreeing well. Number 1, start every disagreement with some agreement. That's agreement about how you're going to have the conversation. We're not going to interrupt each other, so we're going to take turns. And agreement about what the conversation is about. Number 2, make actual arguments. So an argument is not all the thoughts that you've had on a given subject. It's not emoting. It's a tool to help the other person understand your perspective. And it needs to answer at least 2 questions. Why is the point that you're making true, and why should it change the other person's mind? Number 3, imagine that you might be wrong. Think of the best points for the other side. That little crack in your certainty allows something like empathy and understanding to shine through. And number 4, avoid just saying no. In the end, a debate is a comparison, and you have to be for something and not just against your opponent. And if you have someone who's just saying no to every idea you put forward, you should turn around and ask them, well, what do you propose instead?
Karen, do you think any of Bo's tips might be helpful?
Yes, they would be probably very helpful as long as you can remember them in the heat of a moment.
A little cheat sheet.
Exactly.
Jack, how do you approach discussions with your dad when you know you're not likely to agree?
Dad and I mean, for the past couple of years, we haven't agreed on a lot, especially when it comes to the topic of America, but there are little wins every once in a while. I remember the topic of socialism and communism and what those terms means came up. There was a bit where he described communism and socialism as the same thing and essentially defined it as having a bowl of rice for dinner, which being a teenager, I knew obviously wasn't what Oxford said. So I eventually kept prying him, being, you know, Dad, have you looked up the definition? Do you actually know what that word means? And it took me essentially coming to him and saying, I'm not going to tell you what it says. I think we should just sit down and look up the definition together and come to, I guess, an understanding of what it means and just talk about it. It wasn't really trying to convince him or anything. It was more, I guess, like joint discovery on the topic. And yeah, he did his political compass and came out as like a full-blown socialist. Which
is surprising to all of us.
Yeah, it was. I always knew he was. It was more an economic right thing. He was never socially conservative or anything like that. But yeah, I think it took everyone aback really how much he agreed with us, but it was more on the policies, I guess, the path to take to achieving those goals.
Why is it important for you to still engage in debate with your dad? What do you get out of it?
I guess there's the fact that he's obviously my dad and he's getting older, and having, I guess, a topic that, even if it's not something, you know, I don't enjoy looking up politics, but it's something we're interested in, we have passion for, and to, I guess, not have those conversations feels like a waste. I mean, even if it is divisive and creates friction, he's my dad and I love him, and even if, you know, we disagree on some really heated conversations, I think having them is better than pretending like they're not worth having.
Would you date someone who had really differing views?
I think it's impossible to find someone that agrees with you politically on everything, but that being said, I definitely think there are topics where someone's politics may reflect something about them which may prevent me from being able to form a relationship with them. I think topics that bring into question someone's empathy for different people, different groups, different cultures, it can say a lot about them in regards to just their character. And I think that is something that would, I guess, be revealed by the politics, which would cause me to potentially not date someone.
Lila, you defended the tradwife movement in a debate. What was the outcome?
I think the outcome's really positive. You know, before I had even done this topic on TikTok, I would see videos of tradwives and it was all very glamorised. But then undergoing research, I think it kind of shifted my position of the such glamorised lifestyle, and I was able to see kind of the opposite side of it.
Did you win the debate?
Yes, we did.
Congratulations. Yeah. And I believe you were Debater of the Year last year.
Yeah.
How does that make you feel?
I think I feel very proud. You know, in debating, it's a lot of effort as an extracurricular. When I have like assignments due and I'm doing debating as well and trying to get my script done, it's hard. But yeah, I feel really proud.
Amelia, do you feel like the skills you learn in debating can transfer outside your life?
Definitely. Yeah, I've learnt a lot of skills during debating. It's been such a confidence boost for me because I used to be really shy and I still am a bit, but it's really improved in that. And also, I'm so much better at researching and finding like credible sources. So that can always help me in like investigations at school and yeah, in general life.
Sonia, you were the adjudicator. What did you think of the girls' argument?
I was really impressed. First of all, they're excellent debaters, so their presentation's really good. The way that they organised their debate in each individual debate was very logical and rational. It followed very nice flow on. They're very eloquent. But the thing that really nailed it for me was that every claim that they made, every statement that they made was backed up with some enormous amount of research. It was absolutely phenomenal. So I was incredibly impressed with what they'd done.
You've received criticism for some of the topics you choose. Have you ever considered changing your approach or changing topics knowing that they might potentially receive criticism?
No. There will always be topics that will offend someone. You cannot have a topic that doesn't offend anybody. So I think that they are all topics that need to be discussed. Sometimes they're very current topics. Some of them are very controversial or very edgy. And I try to find topics that they wouldn't find in everyday life.
Has tonight given you any ideas for new topics?
No, but I tell you what's been very interesting is to see and listen to the various views of how people accept other people's views. And it seems to me, with the exception of a few speakers, there are a lot of caveats on what you can say or what you can't say I think that's important that we don't have those caveats. The other problem that I see for debating as well is that there are intellectual, lazy, shorthand words that establish the value of another human being rather than being a point of discussion. And they are things like you're transphobic, homophobic, you're Islamophobic, you're some other phobic thing. And they are lazy, shorthand, intellectual, short steps to shut down debate. And I think that people get very frightened about being labelled like with that kind of term.
Thank you so much, and thank you to you all for being here. Happy debating. I'll see you next time.